to begin the conversation by talking with Major General Gibson, or Hoot, as
Retired.
Yes. I don't want to be disrespectful. To talk about the FAA's new regulations, which have taken into effect as they relate to commercial drones. I think maybe it's important to begin the conversation there to talk about what the legal framework is before we talk about what news that's that's come out of the show.
Right.
So do you mind talking with us a bit about, give us an overview of what the new rules are that took effect?
Okay. The 107 rules, it's known, or the small UAS rules, it's been baking for a long time, so this has been a big deal for the agency, and I'm sure Jim's not in here tonight, but a lot of folks did a lot of hard work to get it to that point, and then the current team was able to get it across the goal line. So it's a big deal in the sense that it's the first real aviation rule guiding UAS operations. Some might be a little concerned it's a little limited, but I think even in its current state, it began on the 29th, it opens the door for a lot of other expansion very quickly. And even as it is, it's basically day VFR operations within line of sight of the controller or the pilot command. But it opens a lot of doors to, frankly, like a tool set. You can do inspections, tunnels, insurance can use it for their assessments. Real estate has been using it. There's a number of already commercial entities, cell tower inspections, et cetera, that are going to be able to capitalize off this. And I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I know we granted 76 waivers already off of that rule when it was issued. And most of those were for night operations and a number for beyond visual line of sight. So we're already pushing the envelope based on having that rule forward. Pretty basic. You have to take a test, a 60-question test, and pass it with 70%, and that gives you a remote pilot certification. And as long as you have that and have the vehicle registered, and most of the folks have already done that, 520,000 have done that already.
Really?
Registered. Then you'll be able to operate as it's outlined in the rule without any further authority or blessing from the FAA. And a lot of you that have been involved in the exemption, the 333 exemption process, can appreciate how liberating that is.
I presume that you stepped into. There've been a lot of reports of interference with drones in California. Apparently, some have gotten in the way of firefighting craft combating fires that we have with some frequency in California. How did you go about striking a balance between How did you strike a balance between safety and sort of the desire to enable this sort of new category of aviation?
For me, Don?
Please.
Okay. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we all need to understand that we're a public regulatory entity, and our nation's airspace is a public resource. And so part of our job is not to really encumber the industry, but at the same time is to provide ultimately for safe operation. A lot of this, it's hard to validate. Frankly, each report that comes in, there's really not a lot of subsequent tracking. Pilots see it, folks on the ground may see things. But we have seen those numbers growing as you would add to the number of aircraft you think are coming into the system. So 520,000, by the way, that's registrants. Each one of those may have 2 or 3 vehicles, so the numbers are significant. And as that order of magnitude moves up, we know there'll be some percentage of that will continue to grow as well. We think we put in place rules to do this. We come from an aviation background and tradition, but most of the folks, or a number of the folks that are in the UAS realm as we begin, have not really come up in that safety-oriented, certification, professional kind of approach to things. It took us a while to do that on the man side. So we're trying to pull them in. The registration was one of those vehicles to do that, to help educate them and help them realize that whenever they get airborne, they're entering the same airspace that manned aircraft share with them. So it's a concern.
We're fortunate that we have both AT&T and Qualcomm represented on the panel, because they've made some news earlier in the week around doing some testing of the use of drones on 4G LTE networks. And I'm hoping that, well, since everyone's called Matt here on the panel, Matt Walsh and Matt Grubb, we'll begin to talk about the nature of this announcement and what you're hoping to enable, both near term and long term. I'll let you guys duke it out as to who wants to go first.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just totally delighted to work with AT&T, and our purpose is to promote safe and legal UAS operation in North America and elsewhere using LTE and cellular as a method of connectivity, and to explore all the issues surrounding that, issues of coverage and capacity and impact on the network, and to really understand those. We've done a lot of tests now since we started our flight center. And by the way, our flight center in San Diego is just a couple miles from Miramar Military Airport, and we got a COA to give us permission to operate there, and it's been a great experience. I mean, we've been trying to comply as opposed to go against the regulatory environment, and we've had the controllers come out, and it's just been a really positive experience. And in return, our space has been increased a little bit, and every single day the teams are connected to air traffic control. We're in constant communication. We're doing our LTE tests. The vehicles are registered. By the way, I'm one of the 500,000 that have registered my own personal ones as well. And so that's our objective, safe and legal operation. We want to chip away at the beyond line of sight, prove that it can be done, prove that it can be done with cellular, that's a very good solution for a lot of airspace, and we have a network already there that can handle a lot of that.
Yeah. So why do you think 4G LTE is a solution for controlling these vehicles? I mean, what is the potential, and we can go from there.
Right. Well, so first of all, we're also very excited about the collaboration. It gives us a real opportunity to demonstrate with somebody who's providing, hardware and intelligence to this space, and gives us an opportunity to bring network expertise and kind of meld those together to understand, what's the level of services that we can provide today in today's network status, right? And then what are the things that we can do from a drone perspective on the device itself, or from a network perspective. I think one of the things that's important to recognize, though, is for AT&T, we don't view regulations as a gating factor to the opportunity for us in this category, right? There are opportunities today for us to serve businesses in this space. Insurance companies have plans to do hundreds of thousands of inspections, right? Being able to get that data back to where it needs to be analyzed is really important, and we don't need beyond visual line of sight authorization to be able to do that, right? So there are things that we can do in today's environment to serve the category, but we also really want to position ourselves well for when it is time for beyond visual line of sight, and ensuring that ahead of that we can demonstrate to the FAA, we can demonstrate to those that will be using the services that we can meet standards that are acceptable or necessary to operate with.
Mm-hmm. So Brian and Jennifer, I wanted to get you both involved in the conversation. So what needs to happen for the industry to demonstrate that these vehicles can be operated safely beyond the visual line of sight, and then what sorts of use cases does that enable? Either one of you can take the question.
Well, let's go back to firefighting for a quick second.
Okay.
That's close to my heart. My son's a firefighter.
Ah, okay.
And it's an interesting case from the standpoint that people, what's been getting a lot of play in the press are people launching drones to essentially figure out, hey, is that fire coming over the ridge here? Do I need to evacuate my family, et cetera, et cetera? They have the same motivation as a site commander who's trying to utilize the same technology increasingly to increase situational awareness for how to fight that fire.
Right.
So this is one of those really interesting moments when Mark Bathwick, for example, who's a friend of several of us up here on this panel, who works for the Department of Interior, who's depending upon what day of the week it is, tracking some 450 wildland fires around the country, is looking at how do I provide the feed that site commander is looking at real time, not just to the site commander, but to the community at large. That way, that temptation that someone has to launch their own drone that might interfere with their operations goes away.
Right.
All right, so that's a good example of how, we think that we can fly safely, but, we never like conflicts in the airspace, right? Conflicts are things to be avoided. And so that's probably a more complex case because you've got a lot of different things, a lot of moving parts for the kinds of use cases that we think are unlocking value right now under the new Part 107.
Right, talk to that, that's great.
Infrastructure, the kinds of things that are key to this industry, cell phone inspections, doing things of that nature, being able to figure out, hey, am I getting the right signal, or a strong enough signal for the ballpark during a really large game, et cetera. Those are things that I think we can do under these rules, and we're going to collect data. One of the most important things that we're looking at is how do we take the vanguard of operators that we've currently got under Section 333 exemptions, about 5,500 operators, and build on that in a very professional way. The good news about that vanguard is they're all Part 61 certificated pilots. Right? So they know the airspace, they generally understand risk-based decision-making, all the kinds of things that we pilots are taught. Now we've got people coming in that are, that don't necessarily have that tradition, as Hoot indicated, and we, as an industry, we need to make certain that they're properly trained. So that's a very robust discussion. The good news is there are lots of training programs popping up. The entire aviation industry knows how to teach people about these kinds of things, so there's a lot of motivated folks. As a community, we want to basically get that in alignment and make sure that it's meeting the needs of industries like the wireless industry, that obviously has infrastructure to protect. We don't want to be running into things. We don't want things running into each other. And that's largely a function of professionalism. So
Right.
that's a key to the success moving forward.
Yeah, I know these regulations pertain to sort of commercial operation. How does your industry deal with the hobbyist? My neighbor down the street who has been, flying his drone over our house. I mean, it's not a nuisance. I think it's actually cool, and I'm just a tiny bit jealous. But so how does your industry sort of professionalize and bring in the hobbyist in a way that's safe? I'll throw it for you or for Jennifer or whomever.
They're potential future operators, commercial operators in many respects. So we have a very good relationship with the main organization that's been serving that community for a long time. That's the Academy of Model Aeronautics. They've been a great partner along with the FAA in our Know Before You Fly campaign that is now supported by over 100 organizations in the hobbyist space from the general aviation community or the aviation community in general. And really it's about education. More than anything else, it's about education. I walk out of an Apple store, I've got this really cool drone. First instinct is, let's see how high this will go.
Right.
But you might be standing in airspace where that could cause a problem. So making sure that people understand that, we're literally putting the materials right in the boxes. Increasingly, the manufacturers themselves are taking those materials, either they've got their own materials or they're taking the materials from the Know Before You Fly campaign, and they're putting them in the boxes themselves.
Okay, let's shift back to the 4G conversation. What is the mobile network able to do that can't be addressed through other means of communicating with the devices? What sort of applications are enabled by using mobile networks, and then what are the technical difficulties or hurdles that you need to overcome? Either Matt.
Yeah, so if you think about, what are the things that you would transmit, right? If you think about use cases that we have today, we announced here at CTIA a relationship with a company called Skycatch, and they're using drones today to do GPS corrections so they can provide better accuracy for their operations at construction sites. They're also feeding back telemetry data on the aircraft and performance data on the aircraft so they know that when it needs to be serviced. So you think about those cases, and those are very low bandwidth use cases. But then there are high bandwidth use cases when you start talking about critical infrastructure inspection or what Art Pregler and our team is doing from a tower inspection perspective, right? And so using drones to be able to feed back information on those type of assets, a little higher bandwidth. What are the challenges? you know, the network itself was built to connect things on the ground, right? Nobody
Right.
contemplated connecting things in the sky. And so this is a real big reason why we've engaged with Qualcomm, is because we, as I said earlier, we want to assess what is the network capable of providing in its current state. We've got some really good feedback about what it's capable of right now. But then also, you know, what are the things that we can do with today's network, with tomorrow's networks to best accommodate the needs of this category.
We'll get soon to other ways of connecting these devices. But Matt, can you talk to me about the nature of the testing? I mean, what did you have to put in place to begin testing the use of these the 4G network for navigation? Tell me about how you built out the capabilities to test and what exactly you're looking at.
Sure. So, well, first we had to get, you know, approval from the FAA to use the location. But when we actually go out to test, we're looking at the performance of the flight control, the position location. The position location that's on your phone and a cell phone updates about every 5 or 10 seconds. You'd like to have, and many of the drone vendors are requesting 5 hertz or 10 hertz GPS update. So we want to study what happens to that. We want to study what happens when there are obstructions in the path. So one of the biggest requests from vendors is you take off, you fly away, all of a sudden I can't see it, and I say return to home, and then there's an obstacle in the path. So you want to explore the ability of the vehicle to do some computer vision, some path planning, some recognition, so it can avoid that. And when it gets close to land, it can look down and it can assist the landing. From a network perspective, we're looking at how many base stations we see. What's the performance of the handoff? You know, how many handoffs succeed, how many fail? What kind of architectures can tolerate an outage and still succeed? We want fail-safe, we want fail-operative operation. So it's those kind of things.
I just want to make one more comment about,
Sure.
you know, what can the network provide? And when we think about this, right, connectivity for AT&T is obviously at the core, but it's not the only thing that we think we can bring to the table. You know, identity is a really important part of, you know, operations in this space, and making sure that who you say you are is actually who you are, right? And we've got that pretty well figured out on the handset side of the business, right?
Right.
What we allow on our network. You know, security is a very important part of our operations and the communications that we have today, right? And security is going to be really important for this category. So we think there are, you know, while connectivity is at the core, but there's a number of, I'll say, ancillary services that we can bring to bear that help us enable this space.
Yeah, go ahead,
And I
Jennifer.
would just follow on to what both of the Matts have been talking about in terms of the studies that are being done. From an FCC point of view and also from an FAA point of view, the work that they're doing is just so important because we need to have an understanding of how the commercial networks can both satisfy the terrestrial needs of all of us as we use our devices, and then also simultaneously serve the needs of low-altitude drones. And we were all in NASA Ames a couple of weeks ago. There's a spectrum working group that we're all a part of, and the FCC was there, and we just worked through a number of issues that we really need to resolve with respect to how the networks function and how these needs will be met and what could be potential for interference and other issues. And so we'll be working through those issues as part of the NASA working group and as part of the FCC's
Yeah,
task.
it's really interesting that you've got this cross-collaboration, the industry's working together, and also various regulatory agencies. What brought the group together, and what is its task and objective? Can you talk further about that? Because I think it's a really interesting collaboration.
Yeah. Well, so NASA generally is working on this low-altitude traffic management system that will help support drones, low-altitude drones, ground to 400 feet. The Spectrum Working Group is just one of the components of that larger group because Spectrum, of course, is foundational to all of this. Drones need Spectrum in order to be able to communicate with the ground and with each other. We need to have the ability to have situational awareness of where all of the drones are. Information about obstructions and weather, and all of this will be part of a system that will really support these drones, but all of this takes spectrum to operate. And so we think the commercial networks will be the backbone of that, which is great. Today, it's really the unlicensed bands that are used within the visual line of sight, and I think the FAA has indicated that that's acceptable provided all of the Part 107 regulations are complied with. As we get beyond the visual line of sight, we might not be able to use those unlicensed bands in the same manner, and that's where the commercial networks really become important. We're also looking at satellite solutions and how they might fill in and overlay maybe in rural areas where we don't have network density.
Right, I was going to ask. So if we were talking about one application for drones might be agricultural, for instance.
Sure.
So monitoring crops, maybe dropping chemicals in a more targeted way. But perhaps these are areas where there are gaps in cell coverage.
Sure,
So so how does the industry anticipate managing that? You said satellite.
Well, right, so satellite is will probably play an important role here. I think the big question is whether there's the right form factor, because these drones are small, and whether there's an appropriate form factor, and Legato's done some great presentations around, that they have a form factor that works perfectly. So I think there are good solutions out there. I think the FCC also is looking at whether certain bands that are actually allocated for different industries, maybe under Part 90 for agriculture or public safety, could also be used as an adjunct here, because this could be potentially very bandwidth intensive.
Right,
So,
right.
and the networks, these networks that AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint are operating are going to have a great many demands on them.
Right, I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a dense urban area, I know that they're
We're positioned well to service that.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, are the networks robust enough to handle? I believe the FAA had estimated something on the order of 600,000 drones. That the changes in the rules would open the skies to greater use. So, are the networks really capable of handling greater load?
Right. That's all part of the research we're doing, right? And a lot of that, I think we'll be participating in simulations with Qualcomm as well to understand kind of what does it look like when you just stop flying one drone, but when you multiply that by 100 in a single area, right? So we want to understand that as well. But I want to go back to your comment a little bit about agriculture and the
Right.
connectivity needs there. From my perspective, and this is just me speaking, right? The risk profile of those areas is certainly lower
Right.
than when you're operating in urban environments. And so, what will be the requirements for persistent connectivity in an environment like that? Will you absolutely have to have that, or will there be cases where maybe the connectivity doesn't have to be optimal in those type of environments?
Mm-hmm. How far are we from having Amazon realize its vision of having drone deliveries? Anyone can jump in. Gretchen, I'll get staring at you. Jeff Bezos made a very high-profile announcement a couple of years back that his company is exploring the use of drones for deliveries. Presumably, that's in rural areas where it would be more cost-efficient. So, how far away are we from that sort of commercial deployment of drones? Anyone?
Well, we've been really excited about, what Amazon's doing. They put our industry on the map with that announcement, which was great, but, and who can talk about it a little bit, Part 107 allows carrying of goods, but not beyond visual line of sight, so it's kind of silly.
Yeah.
If I could walk the package over or drive it. So, but what we've been really interested in is a lot of the medical supply delivery. So there's a lot of companies that are looking at delivering blood, delivering organs between hospitals, and so, I think we're getting closer to that. Those are some really good use cases, which I think the FAA is probably interested in, that we can use to kind of prove that delivery is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the legal impediments to using the commercial mobile networks to support these sort of small, low-altitude drones? Gretchen, Jennifer, either one?
I think initially what we have to resolve with the FCC, and there's a kind of a split of opinion between the Office of Engineering and Technology and the Wireless Bureau, is whether or not we need any kind of specific confirmation from the Commission that the commercial wireless networks can be used for airborne purposes. There's no prohibition on it today, except for with respect to the 800 megahertz band, and so that's great. But there is some suggestion that maybe we'd have to get a specific confirmation from them, and so we're working through those issues now. They're also potentially taking a look at whether we need to modify some of the rules or add additional rules into Part 27 or Part 24, which govern these spectrum bands in order to allow for airborne use. So there might need to be some changes in emissions masks or height restrictions or power restrictions. I mean, there are just certain things that we're going to have to take a look at.
Major General Gibson, what about air traffic control implications? I imagine that the system is taxed with commercial aviation. How does the government plan to keep tabs on all of these devices?
Well, there's several sets of it. I know that right now the key focus amongst many of the folks is this low altitude UTM concept, and as it should be. I think there's a lot of groundbreaking work going on there. I just gave a brief presentation, and in there we talked about most of this operation right now at least is being postulated in uncontrolled airspace, G airspace, and that we will more than likely utilize private entities to provide that air traffic management, if you will, services, much like Little Bells out there offering the service to folks under the UTM concept. I think where it's going to be a real challenge, though, is when we hit the seams as we get into more urban deliveries
Right.
and cross those airspace boundaries where you have traditional air traffic. And how do they interface? How do they hand off? What's going to be the level of visibility? I think it's going to have to be crawl, walk, run, but those are challenges. The altitude is fairly known, but as we begin to really try to push out the commercial usefulness of this, then there will be a
What needs to happen in terms of detection on these devices? Are they currently there where they're able to detect other vehicles in the same airspace, say a plane descending for a landing? What technology exists today, and what needs to happen from the drone perspective so that they're able to navigate a world where the airspace is crowded, we're in a dense urban environment? What needs to happen, or is the technology already there?
I'll start it because this is a very hot topic right now with us and has been for a while. They're very small vehicles. You're typically not going to see them with your eye, especially at any kind of closure speeds. I think both these types of systems and manned systems are going to, and have been, in the manned case, electronic signatures, transponders of some kind, identification, integration. So we'll have to come up with a system. A lot of folks would like to see just mini ADS-B chips put on these. Some studies indicate, though, there'll be a saturation point, probably not in the near term, but in the midterm of that ADS-B system. So, and 1090 spectrum, since we're here kind of talking about the communication backbone. So I had a gentleman who I've worked with off and on now for about 18 months, was a little upset with the presentation before because he's in that space. He's in that space with Google right now, and I just said that, I don't know if that's going to be the end solution. It's certainly a solution for the next few years to test, but I think everybody can understand as more and more of these vehicles are out there, how do you put that into a useful format and numbers so it's not, overwhelming the system and becomes still useful to the manned and the unmanned folks that have to know where they're operating.
Where's the industry from on this? And Matt, we can talk tech too.
Well, I think the big difference if you look at where we've been with manned aviation and where we're going with unmanned aviation, I think the big difference is that the solutions will come from the industry first. It's going to be, Part 107 sort of is that watershed moment when the FAA regulations become less prescriptive because we just can't anticipate or future-proof what's going to happen here. So it's we've seen this attitude, really a sea change in attitude inside of the FAA that, with the recognition that there's got to be a much more collaborative approach. And I think that's best captured in the UTM conversation with NASA that Jennifer was talking about. It's breaking down into manageable pieces, trying to anticipate, understanding that new technologies are going to be brought into this. ADS-B is something that we understand today, but it's still not even completely integrated with manned aircraft. So we've got till 2020 to do that, and there's a lot of pushback from some of the wings of the aviation community already on that. So it's, it's hard to say exactly when we're going to get from here to the Jeff Bezos vision, but there was an announcement either yesterday or today that Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership with Google is going to start delivering burritos on Virginia Tech campus. And, that's a start. And it's those kinds of things that come together, and that's not actually, that's airspace that I understand. You got a little GA airport right in Blacksburg. You got Roanoke right over the hill. This is airspace that, that nominally you wouldn't be flying in with drones without some understanding of what that is. So we're going to start in those kinds of environments, and then we're going to move forward.
Go ahead.
And just with respect to collision avoidance, beyond ADS-B, the automotive industry has been really active with the drone industry because automotive technology that's used for terrestrial collision avoidance can be used, the thought is, and leveraged for support of collision avoidance for drones. And so the question is, in many instances, how does that technology need to be modified when you take it into the air? And then can those spectrum bands actually be used for airborne purposes again? So like the 5.9 band probably can be already. The 24 gigahertz band, I think that's probably all right as well, but like the 76 to 81, where there's some great automotive collision avoidance technology, can't be used for airborne. So there are some things that we'll probably have to work through in order to make those technologies available.
Matt, you had something to add here, and then I have
Yeah,
other questions.
I wanted to just chime in. Certainly collision avoidance is one of the big challenges. We really got to address that to enable these use cases. ADS-B definitely has its place, and for those who don't know, it's a little transponder or a little beacon. You can get apps on your device to see the receiver, where all the aircraft are. But you asked about what happens when you get large numbers, and that system, as it's currently defined, could potentially become overwhelmed with large numbers of aircraft. And there's also, we want to be mindful of what kind of cost we require of these devices. If we require too much cost, then we limit the smaller ones from ever coming into existence, and they could be very voluminous and have lots of applications. And that's why we feel the cellular option is a good option, because it can be added without a lot of cost to a device. And there's plenty of capacity. You were asking that early. Until we get to tens of millions or hundreds of millions of drones, which we're not going to have that quickly, then it's really just a tiny fraction of the capacity of a cellular network, which is handling tens, hundreds of millions of smartphones, which are moving heavy amounts of data. And they have the capability of, since they're connected in two ways, both directions, they can both send their position in real time and also read either a list of an ordered list of targets that are near it, or the cloud can help and just give you the priority ones. There's a variety of options like that. And then in terms of leveraging from the vehicle to vehicle, it's absolutely true. We're developing with the automobile industry the ability of a device to talk directly to another device. I say we're developing. We've actually developed it for some years, and we're bringing it forward for automobile use case. And that's also an approach that has a tremendous amount of capacity because it's designed to work with all the cars in a city.
Right.
So we can take advantage of these very cutting edge things and help solve some of the problems.
Does 5G have a role here? I mean, 5G sort of clears the way for real-time communication vehicle to vehicle. Does it have application in this discussion, or is that too far
No, I
afield?
think totally, absolutely it does. I mean, the firefighter scenario is one where you can envision, there's a brush fire or something like that, and then you actually want the UAVs to come and be supportive of public safety and first responders. And you want the links that are connecting them to be reliable, to be secure, to be potentially low latency. And those are the kind of services we talk about with 5G.
So as the standards are being written and as the technology is being contemplated, are drones part of the spec? Are they being written into the spec? Are you anticipating them taking advantage of these new, faster networks?
I think there's no doubt that the learnings from this testing that we're doing with Qualcomm, testing with others, right, will net information that helps us understand how best to support when it comes time for those type of standards to be put in place. And so there's no doubt that'll be the case. But I don't want to devalue that because it's very important and it's certainly a future opportunity, but we are very focused on, what do we need to do and what can we do with the networks that exist today
Right.
with LTE.
Gretchen, there's a regulatory thicket that needs to get resolved as well. I was just, in preparation for the panel, I was looking over the existing laws. I guess 45 states have pursued some form of drone laws. Some cities like Chicago have banned the use of drones over schools. We in LA are rather privacy sensitive. So there's a set of regulations. So how does the industry address this confused regulatory environment? And is there a role maybe for the federal government or someone to step in and sort of create some uniformity? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not easy to tackle this because there are bills that are just scattered all throughout the United States. And most of them are privacy focused, which
Right.
Started kind of back in 2012 when the FAA reauthorization bill was signed. And so, industry groups like AUVSI, like the Small UAV Coalition, like Commercial Drone Alliance that I run, educating the lawmakers in these states is one of the biggest things we can do. A lot of it's just they don't understand the benefits of drones. They don't understand that privacy laws already exist in a lot of cases that can protect people from a lot of this. But these discussions are starting, and the issue of preemption is a big deal. Does the federal government owns the airspace. The FAA controls the airspace. So how can states change those rules in some instances? And so those discussions are starting. There's discussions about property rights. There's been some back and forth of, do you own the property over your home or your business? And so, a lot of that is still very murky right now. And from an industry perspective, what we're trying to do now is just educate, because we need these lawmakers to understand. They need to understand the technology so that they can actually create rules that benefit the growth of this industry.
Mm-hmm. Please.
This is really a big topic in the FAA right now. All things airspace, all things UAS. For those of us, students of aviation anyway, this is nothing new in the sense that when we started with aircraft, they were a nuisance to many people, the famous Cosby case and on. And over time, case law had built up. But the introduction of UAS, because of its unique characteristics, has kind of reopened that wound, and it's a different seam in the discussion. And I think there's some very vibrant discussions going on right now about maybe the existing models that we have are insufficient, and how we will delegate, lack of a better word, zoning laws to local authorities and give them some privileges. You mentioned the rights of someone in their own backyard. I know it's been said from the top blade of the grass up, but traditionally, 200 feet and above have been navigable airspace. If you were to build a tower above 200 feet, we had to know about it. Below that, it became a little bit more murky, and we didn't have a hand in the towers that were built there or the apartment buildings or anything else, only as it inhibited navigable airspace. So as we bring these things in with these flight characteristics, not only the state and local, but I'm caught up quite a bit in what we call 2209 protected airspace over DOD, over DOD sites or DOE sites. That's a very hot topic as well. And I'm also involved in the pilot program in and around airports. So everybody has got a concern from both sides of the issue on being overly restrictive to this industry and yet protecting individual rights. And every technology can have a downside or a dark side. And there's a lot of folks on the federal side that are concerned about that.
Is there a uniformity of view, even from federal regulators, on how to deal with this emerging industry?
You wouldn't know it if you were in some of our meetings. There's some very interesting, thoughtful discussions ongoing on this. And,
that was such a PC answer. That was so neutral
yeah,
there. You went
normally
right
I'd be
down the
telling
middle
you,
on that
but,
one.
I haven't visited the bar yet, so. No, it's there's some interesting. I mean, both sides of the issues have value, and they both have strong positions, and things can be rationalized pretty solid on both sides of the street. And as I've told folks also, the tectonic forces are building around this issue, not only protection, but protecting the industry and the rights for them to grow. And that was the original piece of preemption, to permit commerce. We couldn't pay a tax every house we flew over. or every county. But at the same time, the unique characteristics of this new aviation piece is generating concerns very much down at the state and local level.
Brian?
Yeah, I think as we go forward, it's less of an either-or discussion. And there was a very robust discussion inside of the NTIA in response to the president's call for, how do we deal with this? What came out of that, I think, approximates a pretty good middle ground between the civil liberties groups if we're going to do sort of an us versus them, which I think is a false premise. I'm in favor of privacy. I think everybody here is, and the economic opportunity. So, but what emerged from that, I think, is a very, very good model to start with, which says we as an industry know that this doesn't become sustainable if we're annoying people, for starters.
Right.
So there's that. I think too, as we've now got more people flying, there'll be more, and you're already beginning to see there's more attention being given to the upside of this technology, how it can be good for society, how it can be good for economic value creation, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So there'll be more and more of that. The state discussion down to the local discussion, that's something that we have been working on really, really hard, including in California with some success. I agree with Gretchen. It's all about education. It's all about getting people to understand that we as an industry care about these things deeply. Our customers, and AT&T represents a good example of an organization that is both a user of this technology as well as an enabler of this technology, already understands privacy issues, already has insurance companies, et cetera, et cetera. So, the large enterprise users of insurance, construction, et cetera, they get it. This is not something that we want to misuse. And increasingly, as it becomes a mainstream technology, more and more people will see the benefits of it. I think it starts to balance.
So how do you deal? I mean, we in the media are helpful at pointing out all of the most egregious cases that help sort of inflame people. I'm thinking of, was it the yeah, so exactly, that's my job. I'm recalling the incident of the father who's discovered his drone surveilling his daughter who's out sunbathing in the yard. I mean, how do you, it seems on its face to be misbehavior that any sentient person would recognize as wrong, but how do you go address these people who are, who willingly engage in invasive behaviors? I mean, is that the role of education? Is there a legal role? Is there a role for law enforcement here to try to curb this sort of egregious behavior?
Well, if you talk to law enforcement about it, and I do quite a bit, they're not looking for more laws to enforce, right? So they're going to start with what's already on the books.
Well, there are privacy laws, right?
What pertains to this?
Right.
So that's a good place for legislators to start. Do we have, and Governor Jerry Brown kind of, when it came to that, he backed up and said,
Yep.
We really already have laws that pertain to this. So, let's not add laws to the books that frankly are solutions looking for problems, which, with the exception of the odd person that's using a drone versus, a telescope to spy on someone, whatever, that's pretty much what we got going on right now. Now, increasingly, I think we'll have professional operators out there. The professional operators, much like, people in aviation in general, we don't want our risks, our rights put at risk with misbehavior, right? So if we see something going on, whether it's somebody flying in the wrong place or somebody potentially misusing the technology, we're going to say something.
Gretchen, you had something to add.
I think the privacy issue really revolves around data, and we've been saying this for several years now. Drones have been singled out as this tool, this spying tool. Whereas, you can use your phone camera, you can use a regular camera. There's cameras on buildings and streetlights and, on manned aircraft. So there's cameras, there's ways to capture data all the time. And so I know some of industry was really frustrated with this NTIA process because even though it's good, there are industry-adopted best practices out there for privacy now, it's singled out drone as kind of the offensive technology. And so the conversation really needs to happen more on a data level. So, what's collected, how's it used, how's it stored, how's it deleted? And that goes for anything. It goes for your cell phone camera, it goes for a drone. And those conversations just haven't really started enough. But I think that's where this conversation needs to go.
Well, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, there was a time when TiVo was new, and you would see the news stories, you know, about how my TiVo was spying on me, or my TiVo thinks I'm gay, whatever. You know, there were all these news stories about this invasive technology monitoring what I'm watching and doing so in a way that wasn't fully disclosed. With, in terms of some digital technologies, there's a consumer opt-out. So is there a way for me as a consumer to opt out of having, you know, of this sort of intrusive behavior? What are the tools that I have as a consumer? Go for it.
Well, there are some kind of informal ways. There's a no-fly website you could register, and some vendors...
Will it be like the do not call list where I
Yeah,
can...
and some vendors will put that, you know, you can download it into your product and then it won't go there. I completely agree with what Gretchen said about there's lots of other cameras, and you know, this issue is not unique to drones. We also have to be mindful, though, of what's actually happening. There's all these use cases we talked about, medical, firefighting, and so forth, package delivery. There's also consumer, there's lots of fun things happening. There's drone races on ESPN, which is causing the technology of real-time video to get looked at in new ways. And this is happening around the world.
I can catch Pokemon, as we discussed.
So people have taken their phones, put them on their drones, and they're flying to catch the Pokemon via the drone. And, you know, we have to be mindful of that because that's a phone up in the sky transmitting and so forth. So, but my point, what I was going to make was, this is happening around the world. And what we don't want to do is cause all the innovation to go somewhere else.
Right.
So there's a really tough balancing act, and I have great respect for what you're trying to achieve, and you're going to do it. But there's a balancing act on how much legislation and how much openness that we end up with.
Well, you know, I know that there's geofencing is also a possibility, and there have already been steps taken to sort of protect airspace through geofencing. Do you see that as becoming a consumer solution? Like, I don't want drones over my house, so I geofence it. Is that an option? Is that a realistic option?
I mean, yes, geofencing is an option, and I think, you know, for things like DoD restricted airspace, critical infrastructure, I think that those are, you know, good things to be geofenced. The White House, for example. But when I think about it, and I think about, you know, you have the ability to opt out. You can go online, you can kind of register your house as an address, like your property you don't want to be flown over. And then you think about UTM and this kind of highways in the sky that are being built. You know, I think about it, and so the drone's going to have to, like, it seems like it's going to be more dangerous because the drone is going to have this really crazy way.
Right.
You know, think about Amazon delivering from point A to point B. They're going to have to, you know, go all around all sorts of different paths, and I just think it confuses the airspace.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I've grilled these guys enough. You must have some questions, so I wanted to open the floor to questions. If you have no others, I'll resume the grilling process. Really? No questions? Please. Just wait just a moment. The gentleman will be with you, so we can all hear.
This may be an answer you don't want to give, but it's your choice. Question on your test you've done on that specific area near the airport. Is that San Jose or somewhere down there? Have you lost any drones? Have you had any come down or have issues with them because of non-connectivity with the cellular network?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. We've had over 500 flights, and we've lost 0. We have a safety pilot, and we have a line of sight. So even though we're testing LTE, we have a line of sight connection all the time. And we've done over 500 flights with no losses of vehicles. We have had our safety protocol invoked a couple of times.
What does that mean?
That means there can be, you know, we'll get some data that the thing's not performing properly, or maybe we have, in each case, there's an observer that's watching and maybe they don't see. And when that happens, we invoke and we land. So we've done that a couple of times, you know, like single-digit number of times. Each time a success. And so, you know, we're being very cautious, and we've had very good results so far, and that's the way we're going to operate.
And I want to address that question a little bit too, right? So there's this idea that, you know, so when you're having a voice call and it drops, right, the call's over, but that's not necessarily the plan, right, from a UAV operations perspective. If you lose cellular connectivity, all of a sudden the aircraft powers down and crashes into the ground. That's not the intent, right? We think that it's very important that there's intelligence on the device that allows it to operate with and without connectivity. So if there is link loss, it still has the ability to operate safely.
A couple more comments. That's absolutely correct. And one can envision for commercial use cases and to have them certified to be non-line of sight and so forth, that they will be designed with redundancy. They will be designed with aerospace grade materials. The software and hardware will be certified so that it can have fail-safe and fail-operative functions, that the radio services that we're using are also specified to be reliable and redundant and secure. It takes all of that. Then we can have the confidence to do what we're talking about. And that's not dissimilar to the way commercial aviation works.
Right. Question over in the corner.
I have a technical question. Do the drones right now talk to the base station, or talk to the smartphone, or talk to both?
Well, right now when we fly them, there is a line of sight radio link, which is not cellular. It's a traditional radio link. And then there's an LTE connection, which is between the drone and the base station. So if it's talking to a smartphone, it's through the network connection. So we do have the ability to watch the video real time and those sorts of things, but it's through, on our test system right now, it's through the network.
Any other questions? I did have one question. I'm just curious about, so as autonomous vehicles are more and more part of our conversation, there's discussions about collision avoidance technologies that exist. Is there something analogous that's happening in commercial in commercial planes that would avoid not only collisions with drones but with other craft? Does that exist today, or is that something that you envision coming on the near horizon? It would seem to make logical sense.
Right, kind of like TCAS.
Yeah.
And there's an ACAS-U development. Some believe in it, some don't, for the mid-size and large-size vehicles, because they'll have different performance characteristics. So it needs to have a different warning set, if you will, on it. This low-altitude electronic signature capability with UTM, a lot of work is going into a number of those devices so that if they sense a manned ADS-B signal, they basically will leave. Very important for helicopters, flight for life, those kind of things, where they may enter into that similar zone. So yes, I guess long answer to your question.
Thank you. I was just curious.
A lot of work being done in that area.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, I wanted to thank the panel for their time and thoughtful responses.